This video was made possible by my diamond level patron, Daniel Shillito. You can commission your very own video right now by going over to my Patreon page. And before this video begins, I'd like to give a special shout out to my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez. A few months ago I was commissioned to review John Carpenter's The Thing, a chilling horror movie about a shape-shifting alien tormenting the crew of a remote Antarctic outpost. This time I've been tasked with tackling Prince of Darkness, the second movie in the so-called Apocalypse trilogy, a loosely connected trio of movies which only connected with themes. Prince of Darkness is all about a group of quantum physics students investigating an old, mysterious cylinder of liquid, which actually turns out to be the liquid embodiment of Satan himself. You know, the usual then. Much like The Thing before it, Prince of Darkness was received pretty poorly when it came out, only to develop a loyal cult following in the following decades. Has it really aged that well to earn such popularity, or does it remain a weak, badly characterised movie? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So strap in and call up your old pal Ivan Ooze, because it's time to review Prince of Darkness.
You asked for it!
The movie starts off quite suspensefully, similar to The Thing, with this slow introduction punctuated by a synth-filled score. It does a good job setting the tone and creating a daunting atmosphere as the priest discovers writings about the mysterious Brotherhood of Sleep, an ancient, secretive sect of the Catholic Church tasked with guarding the liquid embodiment of Satan, which the priest finds hidden away in the basement of an old abandoned church. It's a creepy visual, this ominous green liquid surrounded by all these candles and crosses. It almost makes it look like a god in its own right, with a very intimidating aura to it, just sitting there but constantly feeling like it's watching and waiting. Convinced that the only way to study and stop this mysterious liquid is using common sense and rationality to shield everyone from the influence of Satan, the priest enlists Professor Byrak and his very unconvincing students. Yeah, you ain't fooling anyone. This establishing scene is a lecture about beliefs, introducing some of the core themes of the story. It questions the nature of our belief and how everything we understand about life and the universe can easily be shattered and changed. It's interesting how Byrak is established as more of a philosopher than a cold and calculated scientist. It makes him a good fit for a story so obsessed with science.
None of this is truth. Say goodbye to classical reality.
My main criticism of the movie is how self-indulgent and pretentious it is. The dialogue is bad enough, but the narrative is obsessed with turning religion and Satan into hard science. This isn't necessarily bad, but it just feels like the brief period in the 1980s where Doctor Who became hellbent on putting the science back in science fiction, making whole stories about maths equations, rather than it being enjoyable sci-fi fun for the whole family. In this movie, it's almost symbolised by the researchers bringing in all this scientific equipment into the church, removing any divide between science and religion and kind of mashing them together. Because yes, in a bizarre twist, Jesus is actually an alien from space, meaning God isn't real. I guess those Ancient Aliens documentaries were actually right all along. Admittedly, I do find this fascinating. The idea that aliens and otherworldly beings are heralded as gods and demons simply because they're too unfathomable and inexplicable for us to understand. We have to rationalise them as something mythical, because that's the only way we can feel comfortable with their mere existence. Indeed, the truth about religion is that Jesus came to Earth to warn the population about this green goo, only to be executed because too many people believed him and the influential people of the time saw him as a threat. So it's like they say, they hated Jesus because he spoke the truth. It really shows how individual human ambition is constantly undercutting our civilization as a whole and preventing us from making the right decisions, because we killed him rather than heeding his very real warning. It's almost like the human race constructed its own destruction by denying this warning for so long, only to finally explore it when it's too late.
The Vatican didn't know. The guardian priest would keep the secret. And before he died, would pass it on to another.
I do like how it's established that the Catholic Church changed the reality of Satan to a story, something more understandable and palatable for the human race to accept and fear. As a race, we can't accept the idea of single, focused, pure evil, so it has to be turned into a story to fear. And in this story, Satan is essentially the anti-god, like how every particle has an antiparticle. He's basically the mirror of God, personifying everything we consider the antithesis of this warm, benevolent creator, who, as it turns out, was actually just created as a counterpart to Satan, rather than the other way round, which is pretty goddamn bleak. By proving that Satan is real and tangible, the absence of God speaks volumes, something even noted by the priest himself, desperate for there to be some kind of counter to this evil force.
Where are you?
It's a nice subversion because the idea has always been that Satan came after God, so it's quite chilling that such a malevolent being is so real and evil that we created an entire god and faith system just to cope with the existential dread of it all. It's quite Lovecraftian in a way, having a bleak universe full of these impossible monsters and humans attempting to deal with powers significantly larger than themselves. And yes, it turns out that the liquid is actually growing a life form, like some sort of amniotic fluid. And rather conveniently, the canister can only be opened from the inside. Not a very good prison then, is it? When investigating the leaking canister, Susan gets slimed and ends up possessed, killing people one by one. After all, it wouldn't be a Satan story without some good old demonic possession. And rather brilliantly, the dead find themselves resurrected as puppets of Satan. It's so unsettling to see how their skin becomes almost plasticky, and they speak in this very creepy, animalistic cadence, almost removing their humanity and individuality. They're nothing but vessels. Calder is especially unsettling. He has a number of scenes that really freak you out, acting so unnatural of how he laughs in such a maniacal way. I like how these kills and possessions happen over a long period of time, so when they all come together, it truly feels like an undefeatable force, because there are more of them than you initially thought, and they keep coming back no matter what you do to them. They're just unstoppable. There are so many of them and the protagonists just have to survive and hope for the best. Although I would say it is a little bit too similar to The Thing, with one initial victim unleashing a swarm of threats where nobody can be trusted. It just feels a little familiar. It does lead to some fantastic moments though, like Walter being trapped in the closet and just being stared at by Susan and Lisa, before they attack him and the others have to repeatedly smash Lisa's skull in with bricks. It's just such a surreal visual, quite disturbing in a way, because Lisa still looks the exact same despite being possessed, so it just looks like these men are caving in their colleague's skull mercilessly. It wouldn't be a demonic story without unsettling visuals, like characters looking up and noticing the sun and the moon in this impossible position in the sky. It looks incredibly unnatural and spooky, but it ultimately goes nowhere, which is a shame. It's not like it's an eclipse moving in for a dramatic climax, it's just there as a cool visual with absolutely no payoff or explanation, which is really disappointing. Like, come on, don't put it there if you're not going to do anything with it. However, a much better creepy visual comes in the form of an army of possessed homeless people just standing there, menacingly. They look so ghoulish with their corpse-like skin and keep growing in numbers like a zombie apocalypse. They genuinely feel inhuman as they viciously murder anyone who tries to leave the church. They never say anything, they just slowly back you into a corner, so it's really chilling. It really makes the protagonists feel trapped in the church with no way out. They'll always get to you. They're just there no matter where you look. It creates a very imposing extra threat, although it is kind of distasteful to imply all homeless people are schizophrenic and have brains comparable to insects. I don't have to tell you why that's not a great look. One of the creepiest scenes in the movie comes as Wyndham's already dead body is covered by a swarm of bugs and all his limbs start falling off, culminating in his entire body just collapsing. It's excellent body horror, showing how decrepit everything becomes when it's tainted by Satan. All throughout the movie we see these bugs and insects showing up, creating this foul stench of uncleanliness. It's like a plague unleashed by the beast, getting worse and worse the closer you are to the church. it constantly establishes this feeling of satanic corruption and influence. Even as a liquid, it can reach out and manipulate the outside world, so it feels like a constant threat lurking in every corner. Indeed, when down in the basement, Kelly bumps into a piece of equipment and ends up with a bruise on her arm. And for inexplicable reasons, this turns out to be the mark of the beast Lisa discovered in the book earlier, choosing Kelly as Satan's vessel. I guess it was just a very, very demonic scientific machine. Speaking of Lisa, after she gets possessed, there's a really creepy scene of her quickly typing the same two words, "I live," over and over to herald the return of Satan. It's very unsettling, the villain almost taunting everyone. Admittedly, it's a bit campy to say, "You will not be saved," but it works really well as this sinister moment. I do like how Satan becomes this cocky villain, flaunting the inevitability of his return, and how there's nothing the protagonist can do to stop him. The characters start to have the same freaky dream about a mysterious figure emerging from the church, and as the film goes on, more and more details are uncovered, ultimately revealing that this is a real transmission from the year 1999, and it's being broadcast to the characters in the hopes that they might be able to avert the timeline from happening. It's a really interesting concept. It's not traditional time travel, because instead it's future humans calculating the exact place the Earth would have been at this point and sending a faster than light message to essentially send it back in time. Now, obviously that sounds ludicrous, especially because we haven't even come close to faster than light, but it's a fascinating idea to incorporate, and it helps to up the stakes, showing just what the protagonists need to prevent. It's a literal vision of the future, this stark warning of exactly what they have to lose. The reason this movie is part of the Apocalypse trilogy is because it's about the end of everything, the destruction of the world as we know it. That's what these visions represent. They show a glimpse into the future if the protagonists fail. A demonic hellscape dominated by this unstoppable satanic force. It's a simple yet truly intimidating visual, this shaky cam, panicky footage with ominous voiceover. The few remaining characters have a meeting in the lab, trying to understand the dreams, only for all the computers to shut down and the possessed to begin enacting their grand plan, bringing the jar to Kelly where it's absorbed into her body. I'm not sure why Satan chose Kelly in particular, but she looks really creepy. She's so freakish and grotesque, truly a corruption of humanity. She becomes completely deformed and her skin becomes all bumpy and patchy. It's a genuinely creepy visual. It's completely and utterly inhuman, something so gruesome you can only see it as being satanic because nothing about this look feels right. It's extremely disturbing. She looks like a blistered corpse. Her abilities are nightmarish too, able to easily throw objects around and even regrow limbs with ease. Satan truly feels unbeatable and like Satan. Having these superhuman abilities helps you understand why she is such an extreme threat that could destroy all of humanity with ease.
While order does exist in the universe, it is not at all what we had in mind.
There's only so much that Satan can do as a big canister of green goop, because he needs to go fetch his papa from the mirror dimension. This is another creepy visual, these fingers reaching into this inky void like it's simply water. It's very unsettling because of how impossible it is. Although I do find it strange that, in a church dedicated to trying to prevent Satan breaking out of his imprisonment, they conveniently have a giant person-sized mirror perfectly positioned to allow Satan's vessel to slip in and pull that out. However, luckily for everyone, Catherine yeets herself into the mirror, pushing Satan and Father back in, before the priest breaks it, trapping them forever and breaking the possessions of all the homeless people. It feels a bit anticlimactic, which I mainly blame on the story not really doing a good job establishing the rules around the monster and its goals of pulling its father back in. It also doesn't feel like some big grand sacrifice by Catherine that we as the viewer want to mourn. They have a love plot between her and Brian in an attempt to characterize her and get you to care, but it just falls flat. He starts off with major stalkerish tones, then declares himself a proud sexist, and somehow still gets an in to hook up with Catherine. But they don't have any chemistry together. Both actors are pretty wooden and weak without much characterization. It's really hard to get invested in them, and you simply don't care that Brian has lost his one night stand. Like, why is he so cut up about it? However, I do really like the idea of mirror dimensions. The mysticality of mirrors being gateways to a parallel dimension has always fascinated me, so I appreciate how it comes up in this movie, especially because it means Father is still out there. He's just lost his passage back. Indeed, despite everything, the broadcast streams continue, this time showing Catherine instead of the anti-god. It's a creepy ending, implying that they haven't actually stopped it, and instead Catherine will become the anti-god. It introduces the idea of crushing inevitability, humanity doomed to repeat its mistakes and end up at the exact same fate we just managed to avoid. But I'm not entirely sure about the final shot hinting at this, with Brian reaching towards a mirror enigmatically. What's this supposed to mean? Does he want to try and go into the mirror dimension? Has he been possessed and wants to pull the anti-god out? I'm just confused by the ending and not in a good way like The Thing. It feels a bit too vague to succeed at whatever it's trying to do.
Maybe this universal mind resides in the mirror image.
Lastly, I just want to touch on my main criticism of this movie. This video and most other reviews you'll read end up making this film seem way cooler than it actually is. Sure, all the broad strokes of the narrative are good, this idea of Satan being a real, fallible entity slowly breaking free and possessing these researchers. It seems like a real fun, schlocky B-movie concept, but in execution it's so boring. I can't overstate just how slow this movie is. There's even 10 minutes of drawn out opening credits for Christ's sake. It has the same runtime as The Thing, but feels so much less interesting or gripping. It plods along for the majority of the first hour with so many long meandering sequences of people just talking. It's not tense, it's not enthralling, it's just there. In all this time, none of the characters feel particularly fleshed out or interesting, and there are so many setups with no payoff at all, like the supernova. That has nothing to do with anything. The whole physics student focus plays no role in the ending. The solution is just a fire axe. So why spend so long setting them all up as these great elite scientific minds? The movie only really picks up in the last 40 minutes, but the journey through that first hour is rough. It's a real snooze fest and just never seems to really entertain you as a viewer. It's just a constant scientific and philosophical lecture delivered in one of the most boring and overcomplicated ways.
You missed the big history lesson.
Prince of Darkness is a disappointing movie you almost wouldn't believe came from the same visionary mind that created The Thing. I guess it's a good thing Carpenter wrote this under a nerdy pseudonym. It's just so slow to pick up and it's full of weak characters and a needlessly pretentious vibe, making it sound like Carpenter was submitting his edgy religion and philosophy coursework about the permutations of Satan being a real entity. Admittedly, there are some great concepts like the mirror dimensions and God being created as the opposite of the very real embodiment of evil. The possession aspect is very cool, Satan manipulating events despite lacking a body. Some of the effects are pretty creepy and the music is oppressive like The Thing, but it just doesn't feel worth it. It's a slog with some truly god-awful dialogue. It's full of unfired Chekhov's guns and the whole movie is uneventful. People on Letterboxd seem to adore it for some reason, so maybe I just watched some Chinese bootleg. I don't understand the cult following around this movie. I wouldn't even recommend it to a horror fan because there's so little to enjoy about it. It's not exactly scary and it's not really some fascinating, life-changing thesis either. So I'm just not sure what the point of Prince of Darkness actually is. And geez, I can't wait to be crucified for that take. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Asbantium level patron, Fallon Cortez, my Diamond level patron, Valtar, my Platinum level patron, Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, Golg Nogler, Herna Verzog, and Luke_SY. Thank you so much for your support.